Hi everyone, Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the Property Podcast. Now it's episode 238, and remarkably at this point, 200 plus podcasts in, we've not done an episode on land. So today, we're going to rectify that.
Yeah, pretty fundamental to the whole endeavour really, land, isn't it? Lots of it out there, not making it anymore, as we all know. So you might want to go and get yourself some. Well, if you do, there's a lot to know. Rob has done it, as in the process of doing it again. So he is, I'm sure, going to have a lot to share about the process, and I might be able to chip in here and there. You never know. So that is coming up, along with a very exciting resource of the week. But before we get to all that, Rob, we had our Discovery webinar the other day, and it seemed to go pretty well.
It did. It went very well. Had lots of people sign up, which was great to see. Now, the Discovery webinar is there if you want to find out about our businesses. We don't want to talk about it on the podcast, but lots of you want to find out what we do. What do we do outside of turning on the mics a few times a week and talking a lot about property? Well, we talk a lot about property without the microphones, but there are businesses around that. So rather than talk about them on the podcast every single week, we'd rather just give you a time and a space where you can hear us talk about the businesses and ask us questions live about those services. So for those who missed out on the first one or are only finding out about this first time, it's very easy to join and it's free, of course. Rob, what do people need to do?
Well, it couldn't be much easier. All you got to do is make sure that you are free on the 25th of October at 6 p.m. Once you've established that, go to thepropertyhub.net/discovery.
Also, it's important to point out there's no selling on that webinar. It's purely education just to find out about the businesses. So don't bring your credit cards. There's nothing to buy. It's just to learn about what we do and see if it can help you. And if we can, then great. And if we can't, that's fine too. But you've just learnt a bit more. We've got to do a bit of live Q&A, so it doesn't sound too bad. What also doesn't sound too bad, Rob, is our new magazine. In fact, it sounds blooming awesome.
Yeah, the magazine is going to print right about now. So if you are a subscriber, now is the time to start standing eagerly by your front door, waiting for it to drop onto your doormat. I think I might say this every issue, but I say it because it's true. I think this is our strongest issue yet. I really do think it's getting better all the time. We're building up our team of writers. We've got some of the absolute best property journalists in the whole country writing for our magazine. We've got some brilliant features in this time. We're talking about how to solve the housing crisis. Successive governments have failed. We're going to have a go. There's also a really interesting feature looking back over the last 10 years, because it's now been 10 years since the credit crunch. So we're reviewing there. What's changed? What's stayed the same? What should you know? What should you be doing now? All that's in there, plus all the usual stuff, lots of case studies, lots to learn. So if you are a subscriber, start getting excited right about now.
Okay, so on to our news story. And this week, talking about getting excited, seems the government probably are, about stamp duty, because they are raking it in, Rob. Since those dramatic changes to stamp duty, where we now all pay a lot more on second homes or buy-to-lets for us, receipts have soared by a third in 3 years. That's quite a lot. What makes this even more remarkable, Rob, is these results are impressive if transactions were the same and would make sense if they'd increased. But actually, transactions fell by 8% during that same period. So receipts or revenue for the government up by a third, but transactions down by 8%. Now, it doesn't come as a shock, that really, does it? But how long can it continue?
Yeah, who would have thought that when you tax something, you get less of it? Never could have seen that one coming. But that was partially, I think, the point. It's very hard to know exactly what was motivating this. Clearly, they wanted to make more money, which they've done. Fantastic. And they perhaps wanted to cool down the property market a bit, which, again, they have done. But then that does have knock-on effects, because property is both an investment, but is also somewhere to live. People need to move, and it's definitely deterring people from moving. So you could look at it as a slam dunk. They've managed to cool the market down and they've managed to get more revenue in. But then it is having knock-on effects as well. A slow market with fewer transactions makes things more difficult for homeowners who need to move. And that in turn makes it more difficult for first-time buyers who need somewhere to be freed up for them to buy. So we will see what their next move is. We'll see if they're quite happy with that and keep it the same, or whether they decide to do anything different. But it really is quite a remarkable shift.
It is. The thing that's frustrating, though, yes, they've cooled the market, but transactions are really important. You can have a lot of transactions and the market not be getting carried away. Actually, transactions are still way down on the previous peaks of the last boom, like way down. And it's part of a healthy property market is to have transactions. I know it sounds obvious, but it's true. And it's not just trying to stop people doing buy-to-let. You're stopping everybody in the property market because there's less property to go at, as Rob said. So will your prediction come true, Rob? Will they make changes to stamp duty in the next year as you predicted? This news story, conveniently picked, seems to back that up that they should. So we'll wait and see. And I picked it for Rob, so he's not picking that news story to prove his point right. But we often do that, so don't worry. Right, moving on. Time for our main topic, how to find and buy land. Well, should be able to wrap that up in 15 minutes, Rob.
Yeah, this is definitely one to file under advanced. This is not the kind of thing that many people are going to be looking to do. It's the kind of thing that a lot of people might be interested in, but it's kind of like us and HMOs. We will always look at HMOs and sort of get a bit interested and get excited about it, but then go back to where we know. I think for a lot of people, it's the same with land, sort of finding land, building something from scratch. It's definitely not something that anyone has to do. You can do perfectly well in property investment without ever going near this stuff, but everyone's going to be a little bit curious. So what we're going to do today is talk about how to find and buy land. If that is something that is part of your strategy, then this is an episode where you'll be wanting to take a lot of notes. Rob B has already done this once. He's now in the process of doing it again, so he's going to have lots to share. But even if it's not on your radar at all right now, chances are it's something that you'll find pretty interesting and you'll get something out of knowing more about it. So we'll take you through the whole process. Before you actually start on that process, of course, a good question to ask yourself is, are you sure you want to do this? Because like we said, Rob, this is not for novices.
Yeah, especially if you're just starting out. Maybe take baby steps. So if you are interested in building out your own project, maybe do a refurb project first. I know some of you will be very ambitious and you'll just want to get going, buy a piece of land and build 50 apartments or 200 houses. I get it. I don't knock you. I like that ambition. But maybe if you're brand new to this, take that baby step first. Well, actually, you could argue that refurbs are far from baby steps because they can be quite challenging too. But a refurb normally is not as advanced as buying and building on land, particularly if it's a light refurb. So try it. It may feel like you're slowing down, but actually you'll learn a lot by working with tradespeople, sourcing the materials if you're getting into that level of detail, if someone else isn't managing the project for you. So I would suggest that dip your toe in, try a few refurbs first, and then progress on to land. Now, I'm sure some of you would say, well, Rob, I've listened to the property podcast before, and I've never heard you talk about doing refurbs. In fact, you've said you don't do refurbs. And that's right, I don't. I've ignored this baby step. But remember, I've been in property for over a decade, and I am not managing the projects myself. I've hired in somebody full-time, a head of construction, who is owning this entire process. And we have a land buyer full-time as well, who is in charge of sourcing the land. So while I may be involved, I'm not doing the day-to-day. I'm just bringing you some of the knowledge on the podcast. So with that in mind, and you're committed and you know you want to do this, let's get started.
Ah, good. So you're not going to be building them yourself, so I don't have to go to the press and issue a warning to anyone who might be living there. We're safe. Okay, so once you've established this is something you want to do, next thing, Rob, is to figure out what type of land it is that you're after.
Yeah, get very clear on what you want. So are you looking to build a couple of houses from scratch? So you're looking for a plot maybe with a dwelling on already that you can potentially get planning for a couple of properties. Maybe it's something nice and simple like that. Maybe you're going long term and you're looking for a big farmer's field, a strategic land play, if you like, which is a long-term land play where you've got to try and get the planning. Very drawn out, but can be far more profitable. Or maybe you're looking for plots of land that come with some form of planning already, which could be outline planning, which gives you normally the number of dwellings and the type of properties that are expected to be built there. Or it might be detailed planning, where pretty much all the detail has been decided and you can get on site pretty quickly and off you go. Whatever project you're after, you need to get very clear at the beginning because you've got to find this land. So getting very clear from the off will save you a lot of time. And remember, we will tell you how to find land, but it's not easy. So just going to people and saying, I'd like to get some land, please. If you're not very clear and specific on what you want, they will not take you seriously, the people who may help you to find that land. So get very clear before you start.
Yep. And having done that, you then need to be sure, before you actually do go out and look at it, that you're going to be able to get finance for it. Unless you've got the cash lying around, which is great. You don't have to worry about that. But assuming you're going to be using finance on your project, you want to make sure that that's available to you before you waste any time getting out and looking. And Rob, I don't want to do anything to your blood pressure at this early stage of the day, but I imagine it's not the easiest thing. And I believe you might have had a few difficulties along the way with your first project.
Yeah, so you may be buying the land cash, but you may want to finance the project, which is understandable. Most people do. But it's not like a buy-to-let, so do not assume that if you're going to buy a bit of land, you'll pretty much get the finance, because that's really what happens with buy-to-let. Unless you've got really bad credit or very extreme niche circumstances that rule you out, most people can get a mortgage on a buy-to-let without too much effort. Yes, you might not get the best product if you don't use a broker, and yes, you might have more challenges if you don't use a broker. If you're doing it yourself, you'll probably get a mortgage. So that's great, but it's not the same with land. We are dealing in the same sector, you could say, but it's a very different game, particularly if you've got no prior experience, because that is key here. To get finance, and you haven't done this before, is a challenge. Now, I've overcome that challenge, and I still got a competitive rate because there was a lot of experience in the team, and that's what they look for, experience. But even with that said, it was so long and drawn out, it's unbelievable. The amount of forms that have been filled, the questions that have been answered, the legal process that's been gone through. I've been through limited company mortgages, and they are painful for anyone listening who's done that, so you can relate to this. I've never done anything that comes close to getting finance on this land. It's been an unbelievable, eye-opening process. And this was, in my opinion, with them not taking on that much risk, because all the properties were sold straight away before we'd even started on site. So even with all those assurances, the land being bought cash, all the properties being sold, the amount of hoops I had to jump through would mean I'd get in the Moscow State Circus easily moving forward, because I've jumped through a lot of hoops. So I've stressed that one, but please do not go into this lightly thinking, finance will be an easy process, because if you haven't got a lot of experience, it won't be.
Yeah, absolutely work with a broker on this if you want to get finance. We say it for buy-to-let. As Rob said, you can do it on your own with a buy-to-let. I would say you pretty much can't, or not if you want to keep a grip of your sanity and have a chance of getting this done in the right time scale. Because from the lender's point of view, there is so much more risk. What the lender really doesn't want is for you to get halfway through and then run out of money or realize you can't do it because you lack experience. So if you don't have that track record, they are going to be nervous. They don't want to be left with something half built. That is their worst nightmare. Banks do not want to be left with a building site because they don't know what to do with it. So they will be asking you a lot. You should get help with that. And now at least you are prepared, so it won't come as a nasty shock. Okay, so all that boxed away. Now we can move on to the fun bit of actually going out and finding it. Now, normally there are a couple of tools that we use. We've talked about them in detail, Rightmove and Zoopla. We will come across those in the course of this discussion. But first, Rob, there is a specialist tool that I'd never heard of until you started mentioning it, which sounds like something pretty specialist and pretty powerful.
It is pretty specialist and it is pretty powerful. It's also pretty expensive. But if you're in it for the long haul and you're in this seriously, you may want to consider this piece of software, which is called Glenigan. Glenigan is a huge portal with every land application that's going through across the country. Now, you don't get access to the whole of the UK when you start with Glenigan. You pay for a region. But you will get all the detail on all the applications at every stage within that region. It's super powerful. It's really interesting as well. Even if you're not interested in a particular piece of land, I may want to do due diligence on a development that I'm interested in sourcing. So it's been invaluable for that too. So Glenigan is powerful, but as a bare minimum, it's going to cost you over £1,000 at a starting point, and depending on how many areas you open up to, even more. So Glenigan is the tool for the serious players who are interested in land. Not one that people would have heard of before. It is specialist, but as I say, if you are serious, worth looking at. However, Rob, while that may be expensive and that may be for the serious players, there are plenty of other options available that won't cost as much, or certainly won't cost as much up front.
Yes, if you don't fancy paying a massive upfront fee and you don't fancy doing quite so much of the legwork yourself, you can work with a land broker or a land sourcer. They're the same thing, just different names for it. Instead, they are people who are specialists. You can go to them, tell them what you're looking for. They will then go out and find some options for you. They will want to get paid for this, not a big surprise, but you don't have to pay them until the end, until you've actually found and committed to a plot. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you get to skip your due diligence, and it might not be the only thing that you're trying, but you might find that helpful, and you can probably learn a lot from them as well, just in the course of having those conversations, if it is something that you're newer to. And that goes for networking as well, especially if you're operating in a tight geographical area. There are going to be lots of people with their ear to the ground who know what's going on locally, who knows what's up for sale, who knows what the planning department has been looking at, and will be able to guide you in the right direction. Just because it's land, though, doesn't mean that you can't use the tools that we talk about normally. You just have to use them in a different way. So Zoopla, for example, we've talked about before one of the strengths of Zoopla being its keyword search. So what you can do is you can go on there and you can put in keywords like acre, acres, or big plot. And that will allow you to find not necessarily land, but existing property that is on a particular plot where you might be able to demolish that property and start again. So rather than finding pure land, you're finding a property with land, whether that's commercial or residential, could be old agricultural buildings, could be a big old house or something like that with lots of grounds. Those will come up and you can research them further. So same tool, just using it in a slightly different way.
Absolutely. That's a really clever way of using Zoopla. So do take advantage of that. But beware, don't use Zoopla and Rightmove just for land plots, or be careful if you do. Because normally, not always, normally, if you see a piece of land with planning or just a strategic piece of land that doesn't have any planning on it yet, available on Zoopla or Rightmove, it's because normally every broker's passed it up or tried to pass it around. It's not sold. It's normally there for a reason. And I'll say normally because sometimes there might be someone looking to sell land and they just don't know about the normal procedures for selling land and will just give it to an estate agent who really doesn't know how to sell it either and will stick it on Rightmove and Zoopla. But if it's been on there for a few months, it probably isn't any good. Not saying for certain, there might be an opportunity there, but be wary of it at the very least. If you are going to go down that route, get your land alerts up and running so you can jump on it straight away and find out who's selling it and why it's there. Because it may be just that they haven't tried any other route. This is the only route they know, and that's how they're going to sell it. But set the alerts up, get to it quickly. But then try and find out if it's been offered out elsewhere, because chances are it has, and it's just landed there as a last resort. Another area it could land as a last resort, a real last resort, is an auction. So be wary of land at auctions. Now, there almost certainly will be something wrong with a piece of land at auction. It could be the land itself. It could be the legals. Now, that doesn't mean it's a no-go. It means you need a lot of experience or a lot of experience in your team to pick through that. So it's not, again, like Rightmove and Zoopla, an absolute no. It's just a big warning sign. Be careful. It's there for a reason. There's almost certainly something wrong. Check it out and make sure that you find out what the reason is. And if you can work through it, then you may actually get yourself a really, really good deal.
Okay, great advice. Now let's get to the crunch and start talking about how to buy it once you found it. And there's a lot that's very similar to buying a buy-to-let property, but then there's some other things you need to be aware of as well. So to start with, just like buying any property, the more knowledge you've got going into the negotiation, the better you'll be able to do. So the first thing to do, if you can, Rob, is to find out what the person who's selling bought it for in the first place.
Absolutely. Simple tip, use the land registry. Check what they bought it for. It just gives you an advantage when it comes to negotiation. Very similar to buy-to-let as well. So you may as well do it. As Rob said, replicate that technique like you would normally. Something that you need to do if you're doing a refurb on a property is exactly the same with land, is fully cost it out. Don't guess. I know it sounds crazy, but some people do go into these things blind. But don't guess what it's going to cost. Fully cost it. Okay, so check out what it's going to cost. Do a plan. It doesn't have to be to the absolute detail to the type of brick you're going to use, but just get a rough guide on the cost of the site so you can see if there's profit in it. Now, before you get to that, you're going to have to make some assumptions normally on what things are going to cost. But one thing you shouldn't make an assumption on is the ground. Now, I've been looking at land and property for a long time. I haven't rushed into this. Over a year's work of prep went in before the first land deal came about. And the theme that came up from all my conversations, and there were many, was investigate the ground. People used to say, once you're out the ground, the rest is easy. Now, at the beginning, I didn't really fully take on board what they were saying. I just thought they were being flippant. But actually, it was really good advice. The groundwork is nearly always the trickiest part of the site. So you can have investigations done on the ground prior to any purchase. You may even put an offer in subject to, depends on how you set this up. You at the very least want to pay somebody to do like some desktop research for you, and it's professional desktop research. That's not asking your partner to go and do a bit of Googling. You know, that's paying a ground specialist to do some desktop research. Or if you have any doubts, you can pay them to go on site. It will cost more to do this, and they'll do a full investigation and give you any information regarding about being contaminated, the type of foundations you're potentially building on, because that's where the cost will be. So it's not something you should skip, not something that comes up with buy-to-let, Rob, but something that you should always be careful of.
Yeah, well, that's great advice, because I would have just thought, well, brilliant, there's nothing there. Normally, when you're going and buying a property to refurb or something like that, you have to assess the building, try to spot everything that's wrong with it, work out how much it's going to cost to put it right. With land, nothing there. Brilliant, nothing to think about. Turns out one bit of dirt is not much the same as another.
Another quick tip, Rob, is I've often heard people say this over and over again, where you should pay a third for the land, a third for the cost, and a third for the profit. That's a little outdated, and actually that would be great if a third was going into profit. It's not that attractive. But you don't want to be paying, as a rough guide, this is, and it is a rough guide, because every piece of land's different. We've talked about the ground and how that can shake things up already, no pun intended. The rough guide you may want to use is not the third ratio, where you look at land, construction and profit as a third each, but actually that the land itself should cost no more than 20% GDV, that's gross development value. So let's say you're building 3 houses and they came to £1 million gross sale price, then the land as a rough guide should be no more than 200,000. Again, please don't take that as rock solid, and that's what you must always do. Every piece of land's going to be different, but it's just a guide to get you started.
Super helpful. All right, so the next thing to consider before you actually go ahead and buy is the planning status. Because, Rob, of course, if it doesn't come with planning, you want to make sure that you can get planning. And if it does, then you need to know exactly what the conditions are with that.
Okay, so it's not quite as simple always as my bricks will cost this, my timber will cost that, etc. There are other costs that you have to consider, one of which the local authority, local council, may want their slice of the pie as well. Sometimes referred to as Section 106. Section 106 is the local authority's demands on that land. Now, it tends to be on bigger projects. So if you're looking at 2 or 3 houses, you're almost certainly not going to come across this. But for those people who advance to the next stage and are getting into double digits, it will depend on the local authority at what point this is triggered. They may want a tribute, you could say, to their coffers. Or they may want you to build some social housing on the site. Or if you're really lucky, maybe a bit of both. But check all the conditions on that land if it comes to planning and see if there are any additional costs built in. Make sure you understand who's getting paid, everybody, not just the contractors on site. And with that in mind, if it's got outline planning, you may want to hire a planning consultant. But if you don't have planning at all, you definitely want to hire a planning consultant. Trying to get land through planning, that's just a field at this point, and you want to build houses on it, I'm sure will be no easy road. I've not done it myself because at this point it seems far too intimidating. But if you are going to go down that route, definitely use a planning consultant. And if you've got outline planning, probably worth using as well. So that's how to buy. Well, Rob, we could probably do about 5 podcasts on it, but there's the headlines anyway on how to buy. Before we wrap up, though, a quick couple of tips on the buying itself. Get a solicitor who specialises in the land. Don't just go into your local solicitors and say, hey, can you help me with this land deal? Get recommendations and get somebody who does this for a living, and that's all they do. And they don't just do 1 or 2 a year. It's their full-time job. And also, touched on it already, but for this legal process of going through buying the land, if you do want the comfort of knowing the finance is in place for the next part of the deal, expect it to drag out. Make sure you communicate with the seller throughout, because your finance may take a lot longer than you'd anticipated. So just bear that in mind.
Well, there you go. A whole lot of knowledge in there. The great thing about this is because it's something that Rob has just done and is now continuing to do, it's all very fresh in the mind. And I often say that the best person to teach something is someone who's just a couple of steps ahead of you, rather than somebody who knows absolutely everything and has been doing it for years, because it's still fresh and they can still relate to what you currently know. So I think now is the ideal time to be recording this episode. Like I said at the beginning, if this is something that you're looking to do, not many people will, but if you will, how much information was in there? And even if not, I'm sure you'll have found it fascinating. So this is definitely a topic we'll be coming back to. For now, I'm glad we've just made a start. Episode 238, thought it was about time.
Yeah, just about. Well, it's about time we gave you a resource of the week as well, and let you know what's coming up next week. But before we do, we'll just squeeze in enough time to recognise these wonderful people who've left us reviews, Rob. First up's from Phil, and Phil says, a very good podcast. The two Robs share their knowledge and experience in a thorough and easy to understand way. I now feel I have gained the tools and information I require to continue my property investment journey. Thanks, guys, and keep up the great work. And Mad Mick says, I started listening to the podcast 6 months ago and discovered the power of leverage. I had 2 unencumbered properties that I bought for cash and was making an steady extra income. Since listening to the two Robs, I've now remortgaged those properties and now my own unencumbered residence and used the money for deposits on 7 houses. I've now diversified and own a variety of newish and old houses, one of which is a HMO, one of which is a house converted into 2 flats. It's been a great 6 months, and the two Robs' free excellent advice gave me the nudge I needed greatly to increase my disposable income. Now I intend to buy as many houses as I can and wait until I've saved for another deposit. Please keep up the great work, guys. You are the best. 6 months! Yes, you are a bit mad, Mick. I'll give you that. Your name made me laugh at the beginning, but there's some truth in that. But fair play, that's impressive. That is taking action and some. Well done, Mick.
Yeah, I was going to say, listening to the podcast sounded perfectly sane to me, but after you read all that out, bloody hell. So yeah, that's quite something. We love it when people take action. We often say that, and we've got an overdose there. That is pretty impressive. Also impressive is our resource of the week. And Rob, this is a book that you are so keen on that you're recommending it before you've even finished it.
Yeah, I love this. Is my book of the year already. I know it is. I've been waiting. I've been so patient. I've not read a book this year that I could rave about. And I just thought, it's a bad year for books. I think it's been a bad year for movies as well. But anyway, that's an aside. Bad year for books, I'd felt, until I picked up this one. And I've started raving about it already. I've told multiple people to buy this. I've bought copies for people in the office as well. It's Principles by Ray Dalio. For those who aren't familiar with Ray Dalio, he's a hedge fund manager. In fact, he runs, or did run until very recently, the biggest hedge fund in the world. He's one of the world's richest men. And not that makes him a better bloke, but my gosh, the insights in that book are incredible. Ray Dalio, you may remember, put together a video on the economic cycle, something we've recommended as a resource of the week before, and we'll link to in the show notes this week too, which you can find at thepropertyhub.net/buyland. That is an absolute must-watch video if you're investing in property or doing anything financial. Even if you own £10 worth of shares, you should watch this video to understand how the economy works. I believe it's the best resource, that video, that's ever been created that explains how economics work. Rob and I have had a bash in the past, and we'll certainly have a bash in the future of talking about economics because we really find it interesting. But I always pass this video up first as a good starting point because it's absolutely fantastic. Well, no surprise, the book is brilliant too. Halfway through it, I don't care if the rest is rubbish. It's that good so far that you need to read or listen to this book. It's on his work principles and his life principles, and he said he's going to do a book on economic principles and money principles in the future. He's not doing this for fame. He's way into his 70s now. He's kept a very low profile the majority of his life. He just feels at this stage of his life he wants to give back. He's learned all this knowledge, and he feels it's the right thing to do to share it. Good on him. Seems like a great guy. Like his attitude to work and life. Really like his attitude to economics. So wholeheartedly endorse this book, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it too. So check it out.
Well, that's a pretty ringing endorsement. I was going to read it anyway. It was next on my list, but now I'm going to keep on powering through the book I'm on even faster so I can get to it. Can't wait to get started on that one. Also can't wait for the podcast next week because it's always loads of fun. Next week, we're going to be talking about how to hold a successful property viewing. So if you've got a property that you're looking to let or sell, how do you maximize your chances of doing that quickly and getting the result you want? We're going to be talking that through. And just in case that doesn't sound exciting enough for you, we're going to get into politics as well and talk about what the parties are up to. So that's guaranteed to annoy some people. So that'll be fun.
It will. Well, hopefully we won't annoy you too much. But what shouldn't annoy you at all is that we're going to be back with another podcast on Tuesday with Ask Rob and Rob. And, of course, next Thursday with the before-mentioned podcast. So, until then, everyone, take care. Have fun. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.